Peace River, Manasota Regional Water Supply Authority Board of Directors Workshop, February 7th, 2024, approximately 11 a.m. We have all of our board of directors are here. And does anybody have any public comment? Okay. All right. Our agenda, Master Water Supply, new contract. Mr. Coates, I guess you're up.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair, board members. Today we want to have a discussion about new regional water supply development. Specifically, we'll talk about the process that's laid out in the Master Water Supply Contract to develop new regional water supplies. We'll talk about customer demands that drive that new supply development. We'll talk about the projects that we have available to meet those customer needs, funding strategies for those projects. We'll talk about the Master Water Supply Contract changes that are needed to accommodate us moving forward with the new projects to meet your needs. And then we'll talk about next steps and timing. We've got a lot to go through in the next year on this to get projects moving and position ourselves to meet needs that are coming up in 2028. So this is just it's like the starting gun on it. Our water supply process and the forward thinking on the part of the authority's board has put us in a good position to meet your needs starting in 2028. And like I said, decisions this spring, starting in April, are going to need to be made to get those projects going. So our intent with the workshop is just to provide you with background to support those projects, to tee up the decisions that are coming up in April and June and August. So this is a workshop. If there are any questions that come up, just raise them. Our intent is to have a dialogue on all of these. So with that, these are the things that we want to talk about. These are what's on the agenda. I'll cover the Master Water Supply Contract, new water supply procedure. Jim Guida will be talking about new water supply quantities and the timing of those quantities. Terry Holcomb is going to be talking about regional water supply project options. Ann Lee and Natalie Seidor will be talking about project funding strategies. Doug will talk about the Master Water Supply Contract updates that need to be made to accommodate these new supplies. And then Richard Anderson will talk about the summary and the next steps. So with that, let's get into the cookbook on new supply development that's in the Master Water Supply Contract. The 2005 Master Water Supply Contract between the authority and our 5 customers, that is Charlotte, DeSoto, Sarasota, Manatee, and the city of Northport, governs the operation, maintenance, alteration, replacement, and expansion of authority facilities. As part of that charge, it lays out a procedure for us to follow in the development and delivery of new water supplies to the region. 2 topics that are in the Master Water Supply Contract that we're going to cover today. I'll talk about the future water supply procedure, and then later in this discussion, Doug is going to talk about contract updates and the supply contract amendments that need to be made to move us forward with these projects. This is the layout of what I'm going to be talking about. I'll go through some background information on the demands that are met by the current regional facilities, how those facilities have been expanded through time. I think they've been expanded a number of times through the years. How that capacity is currently allocated to our customers. And then I'll talk about the procedure that's established in the contract that shows the way to develop new supplies. This graphic shows the annual demand on the Peace River facilities since the authority acquisition of those facilities back in 1991. It's 32 years ago. In 91, the authority acquired the facilities after general development went bankrupt. At that time, it was a 12 million gallon a day facility serving 6.5 million gallons a day, mostly to Charlotte County. Some of that water went to Northport, a little bit of it went to DeSoto County, the majority of it went to Charlotte County. Growing demands caused the need to increase that plant capacity from 12 million gallons a day to 24 million gallons a day in 2002. And that was called the Peace River option, PRO is shown on here. So the PRO included the addition of 12 new upper storage and recovery wells. The facility had 9 to begin with, and so we added 12 more. 12 million gallon a day expansion of the water treatment facility, and a 23-mile pipeline that connected this facility with the Carlton facility in Sarasota County. In the early 2000s, population and water demand was accelerating, and so in 2005, the master water supply contract was rewritten to support design and construction of the regional expansion program. And the regional expansion program included the 6 billion gallon reservoir that we now have out here. It included a 24 million gallon a day expansion of our water treatment facilities, enlargement of the intake capacity on the Peace River, and that allocated some additional capacity from this facility. So you can see the increase through time as we move through and increase the capacity of this facility. Then in 1991, the 1991 rebuild is what it was called, was completed. And that was a reconstruction of the facilities that were originally built back in 1980 that the authority acquired in 91. So we rebuilt those facilities. We allocated, freed up 3 million gallons a day in additional capacity. 2 million gallons a day of that was allocated. And so you can see where we are today. We're at 34.7 million gallons a day of average day capacity that we have allocated on these facilities, and the deliveries continue to go up. In 2023, we delivered 31 million gallons a day from this facility, and we have a contractual limit of 34.7 million gallons a day. That contractual limit happens to also be the reliable daily yield of this facility on an average daily basis. So, we can nearly 100% of the time yield 34.7 million gallon a day average from this facility. If we go above that, the reliability goes down. So, we need to put a new facility online pretty quickly to make sure that we're providing the water that you need to meet your future needs. This table shows a little bit more detail on the allocations, capacity in the Peace River facility through time. And what you see is the original Peace River facility in 1991. Total capacity was 12 million gallons a day. Charlotte County got about 90% of that. They paid about 90% of the cost. They got about 90% of the capacity in it. And then you can see the Peace River option, which came online in 2002. We had 12 million gallons a day of capacity added. Only 6 million gallons a day of that was allocated. And you can see the allocation here. Sarasota with the majority of that, Charlotte with a portion, and also DeSoto County had a small part of that. In 2010, we completed the regional expansion program. Like I said, that was a 24 million gallon a day expansion of the water treatment facilities, allocated 14.7 million gallons a day. Sarasota County with the majority of that, and Charlotte County with portions of it. The point here is that you pay for the amount of capacity that you get is proportional to what you pay. So if you pay 40% of the cost on a project, you get 40% of the capacity of the project. Something else I want to point out here is that we've got 34.7 million gallons a day of average day capacity that's allocated from these facilities. Individual customer allocations are shown down here. We get a treatment capacity of 51 million gallons a day. The master water supply contract has 3 quantities that are supplied to each customer. They have an average day capacity, which is shown here. There's a peak month capacity, which is 1.2 times that average day capacity. There's a max day capacity, which is 1.4 times that average day capacity. So if you take 34.7 million gallons a day and multiply that by 1.4, that means we need 48.6 million gallons a day of treatment capacity to meet that contractual obligation, which is why, of course, we have a treatment capacity of 51 million gallons a day. We have to exceed that average day quantity to meet the contractual obligation. So that's something that we kind of get questions on fairly often is, gee, can't you produce 51 million gallons a day? Yeah, we can. We can produce 51 million gallons a day, but not every single day. It just, we don't have the storage ability to take water off the river fast enough to meet that.
So, can I ask you this?
Yeah.
How long do you believe it will take us to get to the 51 million based on years of population?
We're there now because
We're there now.
the 51 million gallons a day is the
But
maximum.
we're not using 51 million.
We're not using that, but the facility won't yield 51 million gallons a day every single day. It's not capable of yielding that. What we can do is we make it 51 million gallons a day on peak days. When the hurricane came through, we were producing almost 50 million gallons a day from this facility. But we can't do that every day because we don't have the storage capacity to support that, and we don't have the capacity of the river to take the water in to put it into the storage capacity, which is why we're looking at building more storage.
So when do you think we will be at that point? Where we're having to strain it every day, that many gallons every single day?
We're there now. We're already there, which is why we're talking about new supply capacity being brought online by 2028. I mean, we're in a position where if we're going to exceed this 34.7 million gallons a day on an average daily basis, which we will be doing fairly soon, we need more storage capacity, more treatment capacity, and more capacity on the river to do that.
And your plan, the plan that's already put in place to be able to get out of that capacity is already, you're going to be talking about that?
Right,
Yes.
that's a good workshop.
Okay.
Yeah, we're well on the way on getting that done.
Yep.
All right.
We don't want you to panic.
I panic, but I'm just trying to,
No, that's-
put all this in my
Yeah.
brain housing group as they call
Well,
it.
and we don't have, like, you have in Manatee County, you have a reservoir on the river just continually fills it up. And of course, there's still water. We have an off-stream reservoir, which means we have to pump the water out of the river into storage. So all of our storage is limited by how fast we can pump that water in. So that's what he's talking about later. As you're gonna see water demand, and then when Terry gets up, Jason will talk about the 2 new projects that we've been working on for the last couple of years.
Got it.
To get ready for those.
Perfect.
So after all of those expansions that have taken place, this is what we've got today. Sarasota and Charlotte County have about 90% of the capacity in the Peace River facility. The other 10% split between Northport and DeSoto County. Nobody likes to read contract language except Doug, but I included this up there for you about
And me.
well,
All right, it's a soulmate.
Our county attorney's here, she'll attest to that.
She wanted me.
yes. But I've summarized this down below. So the master water supply contract includes this future water supply procedure. And the summary is just shown here. Customers will request and the authority will provide future supplies from existing and new regional facilities. And in the contract, it recognized that a procedure is necessary to give us sufficient time to plan and to build new supplies. You can't request a supply today and have it on tomorrow. These things take 7 to 10 years to build, to plan and build. So there needs to be a supply procedure in here. The contract contemplates 7 years. As regulations get more and more complicated, those time frames go up, and we're looking at it's between 7 and 10 years now for a big project. So notice to the authority that a customer needs new water supplies is updated annually. By January 15th of each year, customers are required to submit to us a report that includes what your demands are through the next 20 years, how much of that demand you expect the authority to meet, and the basis for those projections. And of course, we use that in our regional planning efforts, and we use that, of course, we're going to talk about it a little bit more today. Mr. Guida will talk about it a little bit more today on the demand side. So all of that is intended to keep us updated on what's going on with demand out there. And all you need to do is drive up I-75 to see that things are going fast and furious. And you know best what's happening in your county. We don't necessarily know, but you know best what's happening in your county. So we rely on you to provide that information for us so we can meet your needs. So customers' new supply demands are identified in the contract in what's called Exhibit C, which is new water supply demands. The important point here is that by submitting a projection that shows a need for a new regional water in that 7-year window, which is shown down here, we're required to build, and a customer is required to pay for that capacity. So it envisions a 7-year window. So in the projections we got in 2024, January of 2024, go through from 2025 through 2044. In that 7-year window, to get new supply online, would have us putting that supply online in 2031, if that was what the customer would request. Now, if they, in 2024 they said, hey, we got a need in 2028, we might or we might not be able to meet that need. But fortunately, today we're in a position to meet that need because we have a project that's in the queue and is already in process. So we're in a good position right now to meet all of those needs. New water supply development and assignment of allocations is covered also in the master water supply contract. And what this essentially says is that new water supply capacity is developed in blocks. On a regional scale, we can't develop supply 1 MGD at a time. We can't incrementally develop it in small pieces. It's not cost effective. And it would have us in a mode of constantly constructing new supplies, new facilities. So new water supply capacity is developed in blocks, and that capacity will exceed the immediate demands. So the next block we're looking at putting online, if we're looking at the surface water expansion project, is 18 million gallons a day. That's going to exceed immediate demand. But we will grow into it, just like we grew into the regional expansion program, which allocated 14.7 million gallons a day back in 2000. That was actually available in 2010, and we have grown into that. So that's the, that's the idea in all of this. Master water supply capacity allocations today are shown in Exhibit B, and you see there's three tables. This is the average day allocation, peak month allocation, and maximum day allocation shown here. And as you can see, through time, those allocations have increased with the expansion of our facilities that I talked about earlier, going from 17, 18 million gallons a day back in 2005 and 6 to the 34.7 million gallons a day we have today allocated from these facilities. Exhibit C, which is the new water demands, those are the demands that we would see in that 7-year window. In 2015, Exhibit C was zeroed out. Nobody wanted any more water. Nobody could see that they needed any more water in 2015. So when we did the 1991 rebuild and we amended the master water supply contract, part of that amendment was to take all of the quantities that were in Exhibit C at that time, and there were quantities in there, and zero them out because nobody thought they were going to need any more quantities within the next 7 years. That goes through 2022, and they were right, all right? But then in 2022, we started getting requests for new supply capacity from customers. So we have to modify Exhibit C along with Exhibit B. Additionally, we got Exhibit F in the master water supply contract. This simply identifies who paid what for what facilities. So you can see the original 1991 facility, Charlotte paid almost 90% of the cost on that. You got 90% of the capacity. And Peace River option, see that Sarasota paid 58% of the cost. You got 58% of the capacity. And so this table would need to be updated with the new supply capacity that we're bringing online. And then finally, Exhibit A, this is the DeSoto payment. And the DeSoto payment is made each year to DeSoto County. It is currently at $796,000. This was originally looked at as a payment in lieu of taxes. This was a private facility back in between 1980 and 1991 when this General Development owned it. They paid taxes on it. When we acquired it, there were no taxes. So this was intended to help make that up. And that will need to be updated and amended as we get new capacity online. This capacity, or this dollar value, is tied to the permitted average day capacity we have in our water use permit. So right now we have an 80 million gallon a day permit. Back in 2015, 2016, we had a 34 million gallon a day permit. So this will need to be adjusted as well.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to understand this right. So when it was in private hands, when General Development owned it, there was a tax implication.
Yeah.
And DeSoto County got that receipts, tax receipts. When we took it over, we're exempt. It's a government agency.
Yes.
So you said the assessment now is based on volume, not necessarily the assessed value of the assets. Like how was it determined when it was in private hands?
However, they determine the value from a tax standpoint of the county.
I doubt when it was privately owned, they based it on throughput or.
Correct. It was on property value
Yeah.
like intangible tax,
Yeah.
machinery and equipment on site.
I'm just wondering how that all got switched up. that we couldn't get an independent appraiser to, you know, figure it out. It got tied to volume. I don't get that.
I wasn't there when they did the master water supply contract in 2005. It was a negotiated solution.
So it just was revenue replacement at that point.
Even in lieu of taxes, you know,
Yeah.
that you do like with the franchises and stuff like that. And that was the concept. But, you know, there was a whole bunch of other things being negotiated in 2005. This was one of many. And so in it, the contract provides that when that quantity goes up, that it should be readdressed by all the parties. So
Is that a statutorily, is that a statute requirement that we do this? It's just something we did just,
it's a contractual requirement.
okay. So the statutes don't dictate when a government agency takes over that they have to pay anything. It's just we agree to by contract. Just trying to understand the history on that one. It's kind of bizarre to me the way, I've never heard taxes being paid that way.
Payment in lieu of taxes is not all that strange with utilities. You know, when you guys do your own enterprise funds, typically governments charge their own utilities a payment in lieu of taxes, payment in lieu of franchise fees that goes into the general fund.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so just to summarize these discussions, of course, there's a methodology for developing new water supplies under the master water supply contract. We're not doing anything new here. It's been done 3 times before. We've expanded these facilities. We follow the plan, and you know, we have customer requests at this point for new water supply capacity starting in 2028, and we'll be talking more about those here in just a few minutes. How much capacity and when those projects are needed, capital cost of funding options that we have for them, and the water supply contract modifications that are going to be needed to move this train along so that we can get the supply online when we need it, when you need it. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Jim Guida, who's our Director of Planning and Water Resources, and he's going to talk to you about the water supply quantities and timing. Any questions? Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. I'd like to start out just give you a brief overview of my presentation today. I'll give you a brief background overview on authority planning efforts to give you some context for today's discussion. I'll talk a bit about some key events that have occurred over roughly the last 9 years or so. That includes like previous authority investigations and board decisions that have led us to the workshop today. Then I'll talk a bit about the latest 2024 customer demand projections that were provided consistent with the master water supply contract for the 20-year planning period of 2024 to 2044. I'll start out just giving you kind of a snapshot overview of the implications of that on just an overall regional basis, how much demand we're looking at in the region. And then I'll also talk, perhaps most importantly, about the supply capacities that are projected to be needed from the authority over that time period. So this is just a quick background on the regional planning process and some key milestones that have occurred. Certainly development of water supplies does not happen overnight. It takes a lot of planning, it takes a lot of permitting, design, board decisions, and there's been a lot of that to date. So here we've got some of the key events that have occurred since 2015. In 2015, our Integrated Regional Water Supply Master Plan, that's the acronym that's up there. That's our comprehensive work that we do every 5 years where we take a look at a variety of things related to water supply. And at that time, it was recommended that the board consider prioritizing the surface water supply expansion project that you're going to be hearing more about today. So knowing that, in 2017, we applied for an increase in our water use permit with the Southwest Florida Water Management District, and we ended up with a 50-year permit in 2019, which increased our quantity so that we could indeed do the surface water supply expansion project. Shortly thereafter, in 2020, our next water supply master plan identified or projected that there would need to be a new supply need by around 2030, if not before then. And also in 2020, we began the feasibility study for the PR3 aspect of the surface water supply expansion project. The surface water supply expansion project is two components. There's the reservoir, which we call PR3, and then there's the Peace River facility expansion, which is this water treatment plant where we're at right now. So we began that study, and then in 2022, as Mike mentioned, customers actually requested new authority supply, just around when we were thinking it was going to be needed based on the master plan. And at that time, it was identified that we needed to bring that water online by 2028, which was actually year 6, not year 7. We talked about the 7-year window, but because we did that earlier planning, we were able to accommodate that and plan on trying to meet that deadline, which we are continuing to do. So the projections in 2022 for the year 2042 was a need for 23.6 MGD of new capacity to come from the authority. That's what was projected at that time that would be needed for this facility to provide that much additional and on top of what we're already providing. So when we knew that, we realized that we needed to begin preliminary design for the PR3 project, so that began. And in August of 2022, the board went ahead and selected the surface water supply expansion project as the source for that new capacity. That was in August of 2022. So this graphic is the 2024 customer demand projections, but on a combined regional basis. This is really just trying to give you an overview of what the region's looking at. I think this is what Commissioner Bearden was originally kind of getting at. And so before I jump into this, I'd like to clarify when I'm using the term region or region-wide or regional, I'm talking about our members and customers only. I'm not talking about other public water suppliers in the region. I'm not talking about Englewood Water District or City of Punta Gorda, Venice, Sarasota, just our customers. That's who I'm talking about. And your consecutive customers, for example, like Manatee. So what you're looking at here, the slope line that you're looking at the top is the combined customer projected demands for the time period, 2024 through 2044. This horizontal line that you're seeing going along here is actually the current total combined regional water supply capacity that we can count on. We're calling that the baseline regional capacity. That's what exists today. So it's about 103 million gallons a day that we can count on there. As far as demand increases, you can see that it's projected we'll have about 89 million gallons a day of demand this year. If you saw Richard's presentation earlier, he showed we were using about 85, and we're already rapidly moving into greater quantities. So we're projecting about 89 for this year, and we're showing projected demand across the region of 137 million gallons a day. That's a 48 million gallon per day increase over that time period, or about 54% increase is projected over that time period. You'll also see over here to the right, I've got listed a new capacity need of 34 MGD. That's simply that projected demand versus what the baseline regional capacity is today. Now, I would say that's actually a minimum number because as a best management practice for the region, you always want to hold and reserve additional capacity to deal with things like Hurricane Ian and its effects. Sometimes water treatment plants need to be repaired or long-term maintenance is going on them, pipelines break, those kind of things. But in addition to that, also, you want to make sure your supplies are online in advance of when they're actually needed, or else you end up with a water supply deficit, which you don't want to do. This vertical line here is shown for 2030. That's simply the intercept of where our baseline capacity is exceeded by the projected demands. It's really just provided for conceptual purposes for the region. There are other suppliers other than just ourselves in the region, and you will see actually in subsequent slides, and as you've already heard from Mike, that we're actually anticipating the need for new water supply capacity has been requested to be online by 2028. Okay, so this is a quick synopsis of our 2024 customer projected needs for new authority capacity. This would be above and beyond what we have today. And we're continuing to see, as I mentioned, as with the 20 projections, a need by 2028 for new supply to begin to come online. And of our 5 customers, you can see that there are 3 who to date have identified the need for new capacity, those being DeSoto, Sarasota, and Manatee counties over the 20-year period. Currently, Charlotte and City of Northport haven't projected any need for a new water supply capacity from the authority, but that's as of today. As you can see, the total projected need for new capacity is nearly 22.6 million gallons per day. And if you'll remember, we mentioned the 34 MGD of new capacity for the region. That would provide us, and that's by 2044, we would be about 60%, 66% of that projected capacity. Okay, it's a very involved table. I'm not expecting to go through and read all the details on it, but this is again a schedule of the customer projected demands for new authority capacity for the planning period, and this is in tabular format. I'll give you a graphical one next to maybe make it a little easier to visualize. But for ease of reference, we keep talking about which years, how many years. We've got planning years here in the first column. Like for example, year 7, we talk about that. That's how the contract looks at year 7. So I've got that laid out. In the first column, you've got your years that, sorry, see if I can lift this better, see it better. You've got your years that correspond to the planning year, and then you've got the projected demands that are being anticipated to be provided by the authority over the 20-year time period. As you can see, I'm sorry.
Hold on one second, got a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So how are you, based on Manatee County, obviously, that's the one I'm most concerned about right now. How are you coming up with the numbers that you have on that chart?
These, I should have explained.
What are they based on?
They are the demand projections of Manatee County. So
Okay.
we accept the demand projections of each one of the customers, and so that's what you're seeing here in front of you.
Got it. That's not a calculation that you guys are coming up with. That's a
No,
calculation.
this is your staff's calculation.
Okay.
And
Thank you.
approved by your board as well.
Got it. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Sorry about that. So you can, again, these are the demand projections, and then you'll see a total of expected or anticipated, at least, demands over the 20-year time period. So what you can see here is that DeSoto County has relatively small increments here. They're all shown in black, but they occur every year for the planning period. But by the end of that 20-year period, DeSoto County is anticipating they need just short about 600,000 gallons a day. It's a little different story with Sarasota and Manatee. That's the reason I have some red items outlined here, because what you see with Sarasota and Manatee is there are periodic needs where they need more water. It's not every single year, but they are big chunks of water when you're looking for it. So that's why those red years are shown to show how things jump. Between Sarasota and Manatee, there are actually 7 years. So if you're looking at these red years, there are actually 7 years bolded in red. Those are 7 large periodic increments that we need to be considering for the next 20 years. What you can see is by year 7, within the requested items, the quantity under the master water supply contract, there's a need for about 4.4 million gallons per day. But what you can see also, though, is then by year 9, there's a need for another 4 million gallons a day on top of that. So about 8.4 million gallons a day is projected to be needed by 2033, which is year 9 of the projection period. That's mostly driven by Sarasota County looking for another 4 MGD in that year. So what you can see thereafter is, again, just kind of moving down the line, you see where the other large increments come in. I'd point out that actually, even though we do 20-year planning, this shows that we need 99%, more than 99% of this new capacity to be online in year 17. You can see the number here at 22.53. It's not much more than that in 2044. The difference being there's no large increments coming in. That's just a little bit more coming from DeSoto County. So this is the graphical illustration of the information that you just saw. Again, these 7 large increments of supply, those years are highlighted again below for ease of reference. And what we've done is we've stacked the demands together in 3 different colors. So the tan is DeSoto County, and Sarasota is the purplish color here, and then Manatee is stacked on top of that. So again, what you're seeing in these stair steps here is when those new increments come in, how things jump quickly. Actually, at the end of 2031, as I mentioned, right now it's about 4.41, and then it jumps pretty rapidly just 2 years later to 8.4, and then works its way up to about 22.53 in 2041 or year 17, and then only a little bit more than that, so the total of 22.57 by 2044. Okay, so what I've done here is, just to give you an idea, we were showing you what our total capacity is at the plant now. What we've done here is taken those new authority capacities that I just presented. They're shown up here in this purplish color. We've superimposed that on top of what our existing capacity is at 34.7, and then just tried to provide you the information here for what the totals would be. So I won't go through all the details again, but you can see how the total capacity of the facility ends up needing to be on an annual average basis, 57.27 MGD. Now, this next graphic is really just a conceptual graphic. There have been some discussions that there may be requests for additional capacity above and beyond what I just presented to you. And so what we want to do is to pull together a conceptual graphic should another customer come forward and ask for some additional quantities. We picked 3 MGD, and we picked 2 increments, each being 1.5 million gallons a day, one in 2031, one in 2033. They're just conceptual, but just to be able to demonstrate what might happen if that was the case. And again, the capacities just go up by another 3 MGD from what you saw previously. So again, rather than 8.4, for example, in 2033, or 11.44, that carries all the way up to the top. Again, we still have that need for all the water by 2041, and a need would be, total need would be approaching 26 million gallons a day. We've done the same thing here, again, superimposing the new needs that are shown in the purplish color on top of what the Peace River facility capacity would be. Again, just adding 3 MGD to that, and that ultimately shows that in year 17 we need about 60.2 versus 34.7, and roughly 60.3 by the end of the planning period. So just some summary of the key findings. The customer's 2024 projections are generally consistent with what we've been projecting on a regional basis ourselves. The new capacity still needs to be online by 2028, with about 1.8 million gallons a day being required just under 4 years from now in 2028, or planning year 4. 4.4 being needed at the end of the 7-year window in 2031. Quick jump to 8.4 MGD just 2 years later in 2033, and you can see the numbers increasing from there, 13.5 in 2036, 22.5 in 2041. So in short, from a demand perspective, I would just recommend that the board consider those projections beyond the 7-year window. You can see how rapidly they're escalating and how much water comes after that time period. That's basically my presentation. If you've got any questions or anything else you'd like, I'd be happy to try to answer.
Okay.
I was right there with you until the recommendation number 3, which I'm not disagreeing with at all. Any projections are welcomed, I guess, by anyone. But the reason for the 7 years is because I would guess the timeline of how fast you can make it happen. That's the reasoning for the 7-year. It wasn't just picked out of the air. Is that a fair summary?
I think Mike did, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, Doug, but I think Mike covered that before. With the general rule of thumb is it takes 7 to 10 years to develop a supply. The 7 years is in the contract, as I understand it. It's getting dangerous. I'm not an attorney, I'm a geologist, but as far as the way that works is the 7-year window is when you request a quantity definitively, and we're obligated to build it, you're obligated to pay for it, okay? So it could be possible thereafter in years 8 through 20, okay, you've got projected anticipated needs, okay? And what I'm suggesting to you here is, for example, as I mentioned, you go from year 7 at 4.4, but just 2 years later, you're going to be asking for another 4. And when you look at the sources that are out there that we're looking at, you'll see soon from Terry Holcomb's presentation that the Peace River Surface Water Supply Expansion Project is anticipated to give you about 18 MGD of capacity. Our brackish groundwater capacity can only get about 8. So we're projecting in year 9 you need 8.4. So I'm just asking you to kind of think of all those things as you're going to have a lot more information presented to you. I just want to try and make it clear that there's a lot of capacity coming very quickly. In fact, between 2033 and 41, it's an 8-year window. That's about 18 million gallons a day of growth that's being projected in that time period. So it's important to keep that in mind. That's all I'm suggesting.
Chair, if I could.
Yes, sir.
I totally get it. I guess maybe it's more of a question for Doug. Is the 7-year window is contractual relationships and obligations versus making just good predictions of what the supply is going to be. Is that a contractual conversation, or is that a...
Well, let me, lay people. Okay, so the 7 years, is the part where you buy the ticket to the party, all right? So you say you have a need for a 2 MGD, and as you heard Mike describe that other contract provision, we don't have a 2 MGD project or a 0.5 MGD project. So we're building the next incremental project. Then we assign, so the first 7 years is a definite lock for that amount. But there's also the potential, there's a lock, if we're gonna build that for you within the 7 years, we look out on your 20-year horizon and look at the pro rata amount of water that you need to meet that block of increased new supply coming online. So then at that point, that's assigned to you and goes to the allocation table. But let me be clear though, we're a subscription utility you're gonna hear about. What that means is you have to agree to buy the water. And in this case, when they get to my side, you're gonna hear about Exhibit B and Exhibit C being amended, and that will be voted on by all 5 customers. That will be the lock-in for your amount. So it'll go beyond the 7 years. You'll be locking into how much water you want over that time period from these projects that are being discussed.
Well, Chair, if I could, thank you, Doug, because my question is even more elementary than that. Is that a lawyer's asking for that consideration, or is staff asking for that consideration?
The 7 years is in the contract.
That's okay.
And that's what the parties agreed on.
Got it.
Yep.
Other questions?
Anybody?
Thank you.
Good morning. We are now getting into the fun part. We're going to talk about the projects and kind of give an overview of them. As we continue to kind of walk through this water supply planning process, Jim just outlined the regional demand projections for the next 20 years. He covered the current capacity that we have, and then he talked about the supply needs both from a quantity standpoint as well as a timing standpoint. So now we're going to talk about the projects that we've identified to meet those supply needs, both from a quantity and a timing standpoint. We want to make sure that we have a reliable and sustainable and high-quality water source that we can project out to those 20-year demands. So we have 2 projects that were identified in the 2020 Integrated Regional Water Supply Master Plan that we have been carrying forward since that document. I think Jim went through that timeline there. That consists of the Surface Water Supply Expansion Project, comprised of a storage component, PR3 project, and the treatment component, which is a PRF expansion, the facility expansion. And we have the brackish water reverse osmosis project. That is a new groundwater well field coupled with an RO treatment plant. So we're going to talk a little bit about these 2 projects, cover real quickly the components of the project. We're going to talk about the project schedule. We're going to talk about the project's funding sources and their overall costs. And we'll roll those up into a recommended timing as how these projects should come about. So looking at the Surface Water Supply Expansion Project, again, looking at the PR3, the storage component, we have a new 9 billion gallon reservoir, a new intake and pump station located on the Peace River, a new reservoir pump station, which is a pump station that takes water from the reservoir system and sends it back to the water treatment plant, and all of the conveyance piping that connects those new facilities to our existing assets. That's estimated at about $335 million. The PRF expansion project is a 24 million gallon per day expansion here at the facility. Consists of new chemical storage and pumping facilities and new belt filter presses for residuals management. That project is about $153 million. Total about $488 million for this project. It yields up to 18 million gallons per day on an annual average day basis. You'll notice treatment capacity at 24 million gallons per day, but the allocable average day supply is 18 from this project. So I want to touch a little bit on the procurement strategies that we have for these projects. And when we're talking about procurement strategies, we're talking about the delivery methods. How are we going to construct these, design them, construct them, deliver them? For the Surface Water Supply Expansion Project, we actually have 3 delivery methods proposed and recommended. For the PR3 project, we've got 4 major components to that project: the reservoir itself, and then the 2 intake pump stations and all the conveyance piping. The 2 pump stations and conveyance piping, when we look at those components, there's a lot of electrical, a lot of mechanical, a lot of materials, got a lot of steel involved here. When we talk about costs and best value, we want to make sure that we go out to the market at the right time when we purchase this equipment. We also want to make sure that we have enough time built into the schedule to procure that equipment. Right now, electrical, mechanical equipment, we've gotten quotes on some items that are out 120 weeks. So we want to be able to have a construction firm along with our design firm looking at those materials ahead of time. We don't want to take that to 100% design and then have a contractor come in and say, well, that's 2 years out before I can get that equipment. So we want to have a collaboration between a construction firm, our design engineers. Not only will it help us identify some of those long lead items and also the market material pricing, it'll also allow us to get some collaborative dialogue on the design. So we've got a construction manager talking with the engineers through some of those value engineering opportunities during the design. For that reason, on $119 million estimate for those components, we have secured a construction management at-risk firm to help us through that process. That was approved at the December board meeting, so we have Archer Western on board to work with our design engineers, HDR, through the pump station and the pipelines delivery method. For the reservoir, a little different, right? There's not a lot of electrical or mechanical equipment here. Most of the cost is heavy civil site work, right? A lot of earthwork, dirt moving, so not so many opportunities for cost savings on some of those items. Where we're going to see the cost savings is really in those contractors' competitive hard bids, right? The contractors are looking at their experience in building reservoirs, and they're looking at labor utilization rates in the area. It's a lot of boots on the ground. So the cost savings really come in when those contractors are actually bidding against each other on projects like this. So we're recommending to move forward in the design, bid, build, delivery method for the reservoir. We really think that's going to bring the best value. For the PRF expansion, the water treatment plant, we're recommending to use a progressive design, build, delivery method for this. Again, we like an opportunity to have a contractor and design engineer work together. So we already have a 30% design completed for the Peace River facility expansion. That was a requirement for us to submit for the cooperative funding program at the Water Management District. We wanted to submit for funding in the FY25 year. They dictate before you can submit an application, now you have to have a 30% design complete. So we brought our owner's agent on board last year. They developed a 30% preliminary design or design criteria package, which included a third-party review. Was able to submit that for the Water Management District. So we have a preliminary design, and we also want to look for opportunities to collaborate between the contractor and the design engineer as this project moves forward from 30% into that 90% design before the contractor would provide their guaranteed maximum price. And probably most importantly, schedule is a driver. We want to bring this project on to meet the January 2028 needs of the region. So we don't have enough time to take this through a traditional design to 100%, send it out to bid, and then secure a contractor for construction. That timeline's been compressed, so we're recommending to move forward with progressive design, build, delivery method there. Looking at the project schedule, I really just want to call your attention to the end dates here for the large components. We've got the pumping and conveyance facilities, January of 2028, the reservoir being brought online, January of 28, and the water treatment plant. So they're all brought online to meet the region's needs in January of 28, where those demands first kind of check that box, right? So if we back up from that delivery date, you can see we've got these shaded areas right out in front of there, and that's that procurement method time. That's how we're securing those different contracts. So what we have following those procurement contracts is a hard date. We're looking at April of 2025, that board meeting, I believe it's April 2nd of 2025, bringing to the board for your approval the contract with a guaranteed maximum price for the pumping station and conveyance piping, a hard bid number from the contractor building the reservoir, and a guaranteed maximum price from the Progressive Design Build team doing the water treatment plant. So then we will have a complete known number and a package to deliver the surface water supply expansion project. Looking at funding options, this chart across the top, you'll see the different funding, grant funds that we've secured to date, along with the projected cost of the project. And on the left-hand side, you'll see the different phases of the projects. So I just wanted to kind of run through real quick. We are currently in the final design phase of the PR3 project. And I'm happy to say that we secured a $7.5 million grant from the Resilient Florida program that covers about 90% of that final design, with an additional $1 million from the cooperative funding grants. We will cover the final design 100% with no cost to the customers. If we remember, the preliminary design was also 100% covered by a Resilient Florida grant. So to date, we have zero cost to our customers to complete that final design. Moving into that CMAR package, we have a contract with the CMAR for that early contractor involvement process, where we're looking at the equipment lead times, we're looking at schedules, and working with the design engineer. That early package is estimated about $3 million. Again, we've got grant funding for from the cooperative funding from SwiftMud that will cover 100% of that CMAR contract. The next three are the construction phases, right? So as we move into construction, we have approximately $71 million left over between the Water Management District, and we've got a $10 million state appropriation that we can put towards that project, that component. $71 million with an estimated cost of about $123.5 million. The customer share is about 52.5. Reservoir construction, we still have a remainder of about $50 million from the Water Management District. Again, with a $216 million price tag, leaves the customer $165 million. And then the Peace River facility expansion. Again, this chart just shows what we've secured to date. Does not mean we're not going to get additional funding for the water treatment plant. Just means we're not certain of that today. We have submitted to the Water Management District for their FY25 cycle, so we're optimistic that we'll see some numbers in here. But right now we're showing that 100% borne by the customers at $153 million. So on a $504 million project, $133.2 million has been secured for grant funding, and $370 million, $71 million of that is the customer's share. Moving on to the Brackish Water RO project. Again, we've got two components. We have the raw water, the groundwater well field, consists of 15 new wells, about 47,000 linear feet of raw water transmission mains. It's about $75.7 million. And then we have a new 12 MGD RO treatment plant. We also have two 2 million gallon finished water storage tanks for blending as well as for storage purposes. And we have the concentrate injection wells and associated piping. That component is estimated at about $185.7 million. It's about $261 million for an 8 MGD on an annual average day supply. Talking about the procurement strategy for the Brackish Water RO, we're recommending to go with a traditional design bid build method. Schedule is not a driver here. We have enough time to complete the final design, go through the bid process, and complete the construction of the components by January 2028 if necessary. Also, we already have a design contract with the engineering firm Kurovo, so their contract can already take it through final design. Reverse osmosis trains, the technology used, it's pretty standard in the industry. There's not a lot of value engineering opportunities here. And the same with the siting of the well field. Those wells have already been permitted through a water use permit. They've already been identified where their locations are. And we know where the Brackish Water RO treatment plant is. So the piping, getting the water from the wells to the treatment plant, there's also not a lot of value engineering there. The water, we know where it's coming from, we know where it has to go. So we're recommending to move forward with the traditional design bid build process for the brackish water RO facility. Looking at the schedule, the water use permit was secured last November, and the preliminary design began in June of 2023. We have a completion date of April of 2024, and anticipate the contractor coming on board in February of 26, having 2 years to complete that, and bringing that online in January of 2028. So you see that we have two projects, two different quantities available. One's an 18 MGD project, one's an 8 MGD project, but we have an ability to bring both of those projects on in January 2028. Are we going to bring both those projects on in January? No, we're going to stagger them, and that's where we get into, oh, I forgot to talk about the project costs, most importantly. For the brackish water RO, we don't have any funding secured to date. So you'll see here that the estimated cost is about $285 million, and that is 100% right now the customer's share. We have not had any confirmation from the Water Management District that the funds that they have set aside for the surface water supply expansion project would transfer over to this project. There's an awful lot of competition out there, so we're not proposing that we have any funding right now, but we will pursue funding for this project should it move forward. So we wanted to talk about the timing of these two projects. You can see here, this is the graph that Jim presented earlier on the schedule for new authority supplies. And our recommendation would be to bring on the surface water supply expansion project at 18 million gallons per day. You can see that that takes us out to that 2039 timeframe where we hit that 19.51 MGD of need. So that gets us about 15 or about 10 years out before we need to bring on another source from when the project comes online. And then we would recommend bringing on the brackish water RO project for that additional 8 MGD to meet the region's needs of 25.57. That'll give us a 26 million gallon per day supply project. So with that, I'll take any questions.
Good. Good. Thank you, Ms. Terry.
Thank you.
Next.
All right, so now that you've heard about the demands, the projects, some potential costs, we can discuss financing. Get your coffee now. So for those of you who are new, we kind of already mentioned we have a $100 million line of credit that we've been using to pay for these capital projects while we've been working on the grants and reimbursements. And now we really need to talk about that longer term financial strategy and moving these projects forward. So in municipal finance, there's really two typical avenues to obtain financing: bond market or federal loans, which for us would be the WIFIA program. So over the next few slides, we're going to go over the pros and cons of each of these typical avenues, a few creative funding strategies, and then we're going to go through some model runs of what the potential financing for the surface water expansion project looks like. And then finally discuss a draft calendar of financing decisions that we can look forward to. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Natalie Sidor with CRAG. She's our financial advisor, and she's going to get us started.
Thanks, Ann. Good afternoon. Is it afternoon? Yep. Good afternoon, Natalie Sidor with CRAG, acting as the authority's financial advisor. As Ann mentioned, we're starting to explore long-term financing options for your long-term project. So today, I'm just going to talk big picture conceptually about the two major financing options that we're looking at for your projects. First is publicly offered tax-exempt bonds, and really, this is the most typical form of long-term financing for these public infrastructure projects. Much like your respective counties, the authority does have several outstanding public bond issues that were used to fund some of the projects that Mike talked about earlier. I won't go through all of these in detail, but really the key advantages of bonds are two things. One, the long term. The standard term to fund long-term assets is 30 years in the bond market. However, for a project like this, we think that depending on the market and investor feedback at the time that we go into the market, a 35 or even 40-year bond issue would make sense given the very long useful life of the assets that we're looking at here. The other key advantage to bonds is that they really maximize flexibility in terms of structuring and timing. So really our ultimate goal here is to help mitigate large rate increases for customers in the future and help to level that out over time. And so using a bond issue, we have the flexibility to move things around. We can backload principal, we can wrap around existing debt, we can capitalize interest. I'll talk about that in a minute. And we can even incorporate specific customer requests. The last authority bond issue that was done was in 2020, and at that time, Sarasota County specifically asked for specific structuring in terms of principal payments, moving some things forward, and so we were able to accommodate that in the bond market. Some of the other advantages of bond issues, you get all of the money up front at closing. There's no reimbursement type structure like there typically is for grants or federal loans. There's no federal compliance or reporting requirements, and it's a relatively fast process. There's no application required for going into the bond market. Some things to consider when looking at bonds, there could be a shorter capitalized interest period versus a WIFIA loan, and let me just briefly explain capitalized interest. Capitalized interest allows you to borrow upfront to pay for interest during the construction period. So the theory being that the asset is not complete, it's not usable, it's not available to your customers, so there's no revenues coming in from that asset. So capitalized interest allows you to make those payments without having to come out of pocket until the asset is up and running. There's also spend down requirements per IRS regulations related to tax exempt bonds. We could spend a whole day talking about spend down requirements and federal tax requirements. That's not necessarily my area of expertise, that's for the lawyers, but just to give sort of a 30-second overview of that, because it is an important concept. When you issue tax exempt bonds, you are required to say that you reasonably expect those proceeds to be spent typically within 3 years. For certain projects that could be extended to 5 years. Basically the IRS doesn't want you to issue tax exempt bonds, hold on to those proceeds, invest them, and never spend them. And so that's something that we just need to make sure we keep in mind, and ultimately we work closely with your bond counsel and your attorneys to make sure that we're meeting all those spend down requirements to avoid any negative tax consequences or issues related to arbitrage or rebate. And then the other two considerations are a 10-year call. Typically bonds have a 10-year period where you can't refund them. You can adjust that a little bit for a cost, and then there are costs of issuance, of course, associated with a bond issue. The other long-term financing option that we're looking at is WIFIA loans. WIFIA stands for Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. It's a federal loan program that we have been exploring as part of this long-term financing strategy. Similar to bonds, one of the big advantages is the longer term. Again, you can typically go out up to 40 years on a WIFIA loan, again, depending on how long the construction period is. You also have flexibility with a WIFIA loan in terms of structuring. However, the difference between bonds and WIFIA in this regard is that with WIFIA, you have to get approval prior to any sort of structuring aspect. So they would like to see just a generally level repayment schedule. However, they will consider some of those changes in structuring, which I think will be important in a project like this, because you want to be able to bring that debt service on almost in an ascending way so that that additional capacity can be grown into by your customer base. And of course, as we got into the WIFIA process, this is the discussions and the negotiations that we would have with them in terms of trying to structure that debt appropriately. Unlike bonds, WIFIA, you have the ability to draw down funds as you need them, so you don't necessarily take all the funds up front. The benefit to that is that interest only accrues on the amount that you're drawing. WIFIA also allows you to prepay the loan at any time. Again, with a bond, you typically have a period where you're not able to do that. So if you close on a WIFIA loan, you see rates drop, you may be able to repay that loan and achieve some savings in that regard. Some of the considerations of WIFIA, as I mentioned with bonds, you get all the funds up front. WIFIA is on a reimbursement basis, so the authority would have to fund the project costs up front, track all of the costs, all of the invoices, submit them. WIFIA has to then review the invoices, and then the monies are released and the authority would get reimbursed. WIFIA does also have certain federal compliance and reporting requirements, things like Build America, Buy America, Davis-Bacon, things that need to be tracked on an ongoing basis. The other thing about WIFIA is they won't fund 100% of the project. They will fund a maximum of 49% of the total eligible project costs. So in that event, you would have to have another long-term financing source, likely bonds, that would fund the other 51% net of any grant monies that are coming in. And then WIFIA does have a much longer approval and application process. So we just need to make sure that we're keeping that in mind as we're looking at WIFIA. So while we're always sort of looking at the different long-term financing options, we're always monitoring the market in terms of rates. We've also been working to look at more creative or customized funding strategies, again, especially in that first 10 to 15 years as your customer base grows into the additional capacity that will be brought on. And the first strategy we're looking at is structuring the debt in general. Of course, the longer term helps to spread out those payments, backloading or wrapping debt, maximizing your capitalized interest period. And again, all of these things are to achieve the ultimate goal of trying to keep the debt component of your base rate as stable as possible and avoid those large rate hikes in the future. The other thing we're looking at is different investment strategies. Given the relationship right now between short-term and long-term rates, there are some products out there that would allow you to take the monies, invest them, still have access to them without restrictions so that you can pull the money to pay for project costs as needed, but the investment would allow you to cover or offset some of the interest costs, especially in those early years. The other thing we're looking at is the authority has 2014 B bonds outstanding, about $55 million. They're callable this year in October. We can call them as early as this summer. And this is really a good opportunity. The timing actually really works out well because we have the potential to look at restructuring some of that debt, where we could restructure it and add some additional capacity since we know that new debt is coming on. So if we're seeing pressure points again in those early years, with this refunding, we may be able to move some things around to create some additional room in the early years. And based on preliminary indications of what we're seeing, that refunding right now looks like it's saving about $9 million on a net present value basis. It's about $900,000 annually through the period of those bonds. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ann, or I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay.
Just, I don't know if it's a question for you or staff, so on these, on the WIFIA, it's reimbursement in nature, right? So I'm assuming staff, anything that staff brings forward to this board, you're going to bake into the cake the interest that we would have to pay as we're floating that money before we're reimbursed. Is that to be expected of the board?
Yes. Any loan or bond or anything like that, we always bring to the board for approval before closing.
Got it. I guess what I'm getting at is in the Excel spreadsheet of cost, if you're using the $100 million line of credit and paying that to cover the cost until you're going to bake that into the cake and it's going to come before us, that's part of the cost of
Right, it would
making
be
it.
potentially reimbursing.
So we would show you the interest on the line of credit that was being used to cover the WIFIA expense until it's reimbursed.
Right.
And then the long-term cost.
Yeah, I just want to make sure it's an expectation that we don't have to be looking for that. It's going to be clear that whatever, any costs related to making it happen. And on the 49%, do they, is there strings attached on the 51% from the feds, or they don't care how we do it, as long as they're not on the hook for more than 49%?
Correct.
And then lastly, I don't remember the next time we meet, but do you need authority to move forward with what is necessary to talk about restructuring that debt?
Our plan is to bring the 2014 B refunding effort to the board for consideration in April, once we have time to really further pin down the numbers and get some more guidance from tax counsel on the restructuring portion of that. We have a bit of a spike between 2033 and 2035 in our current debt schedule, so our hopes is to bring that spike down to allow for, like what Natalie was saying, the future debt.
Great, so we'll see it in April.
Yes, sir.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, so now we've reviewed the pros and cons for each typical financing avenue and some funding strategy. I'm just going to quickly go through some of the assumptions that we built into a base rate model, which some of your commissioners have already seen. So for these scenarios, we assumed a 30-year bond and WIFIA structure. PRAG was able to supply us with preliminary debt schedules that reflected maximizing capitalized interest. Hold on, my screen just went blank. Bridget, you have the magic touch here. Yes. I know when I'm not allowed to touch things. There you go, sorry about that. They used an estimated interest rate of about 4.62%. And again, these are preliminary results. These will be refined over time. And none of this includes any of the funding strategies that Natalie just discussed with using investment products to offset interest or going out for longer bonds, 35, 40-year bonds. So for these examples, we used Sarasota County taking 12 MGD of the 18 MGD at a capital cost of $248 million. Charlotte County taking 3 MGD at a capital cost of $62 million. City of Northport taking 2 with a capital cost of $41.34 million. And DeSoto County taking 1 with a capital cost of $20.67 million. So just please note that each of these results are going to be slightly different, but that is because there's different debt participation for all of our customers. And there's potentially only minor increases in the early years between 29 and 32. So all these results I'm going to go through are going to focus on 2033 because that's when the prospective WIFIA or bond interest payments would commence. So it really gives you a good indication of where things would be. So this is the first results slide. Just indulge me as I go through some of these columns so that we all are speaking the same language for a minute. So the first column here, fiscal year, is of course the same as your fiscal year, October 1st through September 30th. This next column here, debt per 1,000 gallons. This is the debt per 1,000 gallons for the assumed additional new capacity. So for Sarasota County, it's done on the assumption that they would take 12 MGD and they would have that larger percent of that 18. The third column is their current debt for their current allocation. The next column is their total assumed allocation. So you can see the 15.1, just rounded, is their current allocation to Peace River facility, and then bumps to 27.1. We assume utilization of full capacity in these model runs. The next column is the homogenized debt service. So what we did was we took the new debt plus the old debt and divided it by that total assumed allocation to get you an amount per 1,000 gallons. And then the last column is just the difference of what our current rate is on the debt to what the potential new rate is on that homogenized basis. So for Sarasota County specifically, their current debt is about 1.21 to 83 cents per 1,000 gallons. Their homogenized rate based on a total allocation of 27.1 in 2033 would be $2.48 per 1,000 gallons. And this would represent about $1.27 per 1,000 gallon increase. Or if you're looking at a 4,000 gallon use for a typical use, it's $5.08 per month. So for Charlotte County, assuming Charlotte County participated in 3 MGD out of this 18, their current debt is between 38 and 41 cents per 1,000 gallons. Their homogenized rate based on a 19.1 MGD in 2033 would be about 98 cents per 1,000 gallons. That would translate to roughly 57 cents per 1,000 gallon increase, or $2.28 per month based on use of 4,000 gallons. For Northport, assuming they participated in 2 MGD of the project, their current debt is between 94 cents and $1.90 per 1,000 gallons. And their homogenized rate based on a total allocation of 4.865 MGD in 2033 is about $2.39 per 1,000 gallons, which would translate to roughly $1.45 per 1,000 gallon increase from our current rates, or roughly $5.80 per month for the average use of 4,000 gallons. Lastly, DeSoto County, their debt for their current allocation is between 97 cents and 19 cents per 1,000 gallons. And their homogenized rates based on a 1.675 MGD in 2033 would be roughly $2.56 per 1,000 gallons. That would end up translating to $1.59 per 1,000 gallon increase from our current rates, or roughly $6.36 per month based on an average use of 4,000 gallons. So, there it goes. So, I mean, as you've heard, there's lots of moving pieces here with the project selection, and although we can have some draft plans on financing, we can't present anything final until we know what project will be selected, and all the updates to the master water supply contract are executed. We need that to take to investors or, to WIFIA, whatever the case may be. Our plan is that over the summer, we'll bring this refunding effort to the board, as well as formally submit an application to the WIFIA program. We did submit a letter of interest to the program this week, so we're hoping that we will receive positive feedback for that in the next 60 days and begin to work on an application for whichever project is selected going forward. And then we're planning to bring a final funding plan for your consideration in spring of 2025, because that's when all the final pricing from the contractors that Terry discussed should be in, and then we can really have good hard numbers to move forward with. So before I pass it over to Doug, do you guys have any additional questions?
Any more questions?
We're good. Thank you. So Mike has gone over some of this material already with you, so I'm just adding on and updating to what's going on with our master water supply contract. And first of all, there's the master water supply contract that was written in 2005. And so what we've been doing since 2021 is working on updating the contract. In other words, there's lots of terms in there that weren't no longer applicable. So we're taking those out, and we've been working with your staffs on that, sending that out to the attorneys, and then basically coming up with what an updated final was that was sent out in January of last year. But what we were waiting for was the updated demand calculations, because the contract itself has a lot of important language, but the most important thing about the contract for the customers is the fact that we've got the master water supply exhibit A, that you've heard about, which is the DeSoto County payment, B, which is the allocation, the water allocation tables that you've seen, Exhibit C, which is the new water supply demand, that's that 7-year time frame, and Exhibit F, which is what Mike showed you, was those allocation percentages. And those exhibits are key to how much the fixed costs are and the allocation of expenses are under that. So those exhibits, although it's a relatively small thing to change, are the most important things that we go through, because they're the cost, it's what your bill's gonna be, and it's how much water you're gonna get. So DeSoto County payment in history, what was the intent? We talked about that. It's basically payment in lieu of property tax. And DeSoto County obviously is a county that's not as populated as some of the other counties. This was a large part, GDU's facility was a large part of their tax base. And for when they came in, and this is actually even predates my time, which was 1997, when they came in initially, they had an agreement when the district helped buy out the property to make a payment to DeSoto County. at that point, I don't know how they calculated what the amount was. And when we revised the agreement in 2005, we were looking at permitting increases coming about with all these expansions, and the idea, as you can see in the contract language, each time there's an increase in the permitted amount, this issue shall be readdressed by the parties to the contract. And that's where we're at on DeSoto County payments. Just to show you the history, obviously we see the amount for the DeSoto County payment, you see in the total quantity, and then that is split among the actual users, customers who are actually buying an allocation at the time. So it does not include Manatee County at this time. It's only when you're actually purchasing water. And as you can see, the amount's gone up over time. There was our first incremental increases there. 520 is where it started, and you see the amount started to go up as we amended the contract and we brought new water supplies online, and we increased the permitted amounts. And then we went to 32.7. If you remember, that's the amount that we went to the reservoir expansion. And here's the 1991 rebuild expansion when we added 2 MGD to the permit. And each time there has been an additional expense. Some of the recommendations, this isn't just an example, in talking to DeSoto County, maybe an adjustment for inflation. This was the price that was placed in 2005. There hasn't been any adjustment for that. They were just looking at the flow, as you said, which are just, I mean, it's kind of odd to look at flow. That's not what's typically looked at for these kind of payments, but that's what we were looking at.
Well, now that Commissioner Langford's left the room, gentlemen. We should explore ways to cut that tax down.
But just remember, it's a workshop. You can't vote on it.
I know. I said discuss, not vote.
Yeah, you did say that. You're right. You're right. So what we're looking at is some of the ideas of looking at inflation, an indexed way of increasing it, adjusted increase to look at the allocations. Obviously, are radically going up from 34.7 to 80 MGD at the extent of our permit, and then obviously going up by virtue of the water allocations that are increasing. So that's something we have to look at, and that hasn't been decided. That'll be something that we'll be before you on the April board, and we'll be working with DeSoto County and the other members as well to adjust that in customers. Exhibit C, you've been told what it is. It's a new water supply demand. I would like to be able to, on these big subscriptions, we're coming in and buying a large amount of water at this next increment. The great way to do it would be just to change these exhibits, and that way it's a subscription model. Everybody signs off on it. Anybody not signing the contract stops the contract from going through. So each customer, not just a vote by the board, will have to approve this contract, and the board will have to approve the contract. So we're going to bring a revised contract to you in April, and the revisions are simply going to be these exhibits. And then we're going to propose that to you. We will work with the customers during that time period, and then that will be sent out to the counties and to Northport for their approval, and then hopefully we're going to bring it back in June for a final approval and signature by the chair, so everything goes well. Exhibit C, this is just an example, so you would see kind of what it would look like. There's that 7-year development window we're talking about, and then we're going to take it on to 34 as well to show the design, and we can do that because this is not the lock-in table. This is my demand table. Exhibit B, I would call this is the allocation table. So anything you see on this table is what you're paying for as a customer. This is what we're going to see on that. This is the table that is the lock. You're now committed. This is what the bonding companies are looking at to make sure that we're going to be paid so that we can make our bond payments to them. And this is an example on Exhibit B on how we're going to update it. And again, we're still working with the customers. We're trying to see if there's new demand. I say new demand. If there's additional people that want to buy in as we go forward with the project between now and April, and trying to find out exactly where we're going to end up. F, this is where this is where we will have the list of how much percentage on that fixed cost we're talking about you share in the debt, and then we'll be listing the debt. Although the Peace River Water Treatment Facility is paid off now, we'll still list that because it's historically what that percentage was, and we'll be adding another line there for the new cost allocation, and then that would be the percentage which was based off of that Exhibit B that we talked about, for the new water that's being purchased. And that's what we'll expect to be. Now, again, these are an example. Assuming that we have DeSoto and Sarasota as the only participants in the surface water expansion, then that would be the percentage. That's, no, a lawyer giving the shortest presentation. I think Mr. Coates designed it though, but thank you for your time. If you have any questions, I'm glad to answer.
Any questions? Mr. Coates, I think that's all I see. Was there anything else?
We just got the
Okay,
summary.
we got a couple of
Next
slides here.
Yep.
Okay.
Couple more slides,
Yeah.
and to your point, shortest so far. And I will be pretty brief. I only have 3 slides. I'm sure you guys feel a lot like you're sitting at the used car dealership and you've heard from the lawyer, the finance person. You know, now I'm the used car manager trying to close the deal here.
I actually feel like I'm sitting in a meat locker. The air conditioning works really well in here. I want to go outside and warm up.
Thinking the same thing.
We'll offer you an opportunity to recap what you've heard so far. I am going to just kind of quickly summarize, what we've heard and talk a little bit about the next steps. I guess before I do, I want to ask, is there any questions you have of Doug or Jim or Ann or anybody further at this point? Okay, great, thank you. So as you've heard, let me do that, there we go. We've got a need for new supply in 2028. That number jumps to 22.5 or 25.5, depending on how you look at it, by 2041. So the approved surface water expansion project that yields 18 million gallons won't even get us through that 20-year planning window at this point. So we need to make decisions right now to move this project forward and possibly start thinking about the next project even sooner than we had already anticipated. In order to do that, we really need to hit these targets that Terry and Doug and others have talked about. We've got to get these projects into construction by 2025, and we've got to get them completed by 2028 to get water to the customers that need it, primarily Sarasota County at this point. And in order to meet those needs, we've got to get customer commitments. We've got to get those from you by, hopefully, the April board meeting. And that also includes the amendments to the master water supply contract, which is a very aggressive schedule to get that updated in 2 months, but we really think we can do it if we push hard. Regarding the next steps, the first one we have up here is March 2024, right after this meeting. We've been working with your staffs. We've presented to Charlotte County. We've talked about this informally with folks. We met with Sarasota County staff yesterday, and we want to continue that process and be there to help staff and work with you to make these decisions. We want to be a support tool. We want to be there at your board meeting if we need to. I know Charlotte has already requested us to come to the March 26th meeting to assist your staff in working through the process and getting an answer to what your needs might be. So just want to put that out there and make sure that there's a consensus, and that you can't vote on it, but consensus or at least approval for us to continue working through staffs and push this and do what we need to do between now and April. Hopefully that's acceptable to everyone. Got pretty aggressive, as you've heard, schedule from April, June, August, and October. As you can see here, we've got 10 board actions we're going to be asking for between those 5 board meetings. First one again, April, we're going to ask you to confirm which project we want to build. We're recommending, as you've heard, the surface water expansion project. Also, we want to have this board approve the contract amendments that Doug talked about so that we can get those out to your staffs, to your boards for approval, and then bring it back to this board in June for ratification and final approval. So also at the June board, we need to make a selection, as you heard on Terry's presentation, the progressive design builder for the surface water plant. We need to select that contractor. We need to start taking that design to final completion, as well as look at early procurement and purchasing owner direct purchase items with that project. And we need to extend the contract for our CMAR, the construction manager at risk, for the other components of the PR3. August, we hope to bring the mitigation plan forward to you. And that'll be focused on the as well as approving the 2025 budget, not to mention. October, board action would be listing the pre-qual contractors for the regional reservoir PR3. As Terry mentioned, that's going to be a hard bid, so we're going to pre-qual the contractors for that and then have them bid that as a hard bid. December, we're going to give you a break for Christmas. We're not going to have any board action, but we will have project updates for you. And then in April, as you heard Terry mention again, we're going to bring the GMPs for the PR3, the conveyance and pumping facilities, the contractor hard bid for the reservoir, and the GMP for the water plant, all to that April 2025 board meeting for consideration. So again, just a lot to do in the next 12 to 14 months, but anything we can do to assist you, we're here to work with you and your staffs, and we welcome the opportunity to do that. So,
Any questions, Shelley?
turn back over to Mike. Are we done?
Until the sitting vice chair adjourns.
So, I guess we can bypass the public comments. That's if somebody didn't get a chance to speak earlier.
You can ask if there's somebody.
Yeah, if there's somebody that didn't have enough time that would like to come up for public comments, you're welcome to approach the, yeah, you can go ahead. It's on the agenda. You have 3 minutes.
You made a comment about El not being here. Well, I'm his right-hand man.
You know I was joking. Thank you, sir. Any staff comments? Any board member comments?
Yeah, actually, I'll take 1 second on this.
Commissioner
First,
Moreau.
welcome to Commissioner Bearden, but staff did a really, really good job on this. You know, it's tough. We sit on a lot of sub-advisory boards, and you know, in a frustrating way sometimes they get us involved in stuff that are managerial decisions, not policy decisions, and I think everything that's presented here today was laying it at the feet for policy decisions, which I just really appreciate. Great job.
It's an honor to be on this board with you, gentlemen. Thank you.
And welcome to the board. I'm a newbie too. This is only my second meeting, so I feel you. No problem.
Just
Mr.
one
Coates.
comment. We have lunch out here. Everyone's welcome. Help yourselves.
Board members go first. Chairman's first in line, or acting chairman. This meeting's adjourned.
Thank you. It's your first official act of acting chair.
Actually, we have sandwiches for you guys in a small portion if you want to go up and help yourselves.
I was going to introduce myself when I was on tonight. Commissioner Bearden, Terry, engineering director. You're preempting all the discussion, right? Thank you.
Yeah, I got a call too. All right, we're on the same page.
Exciting meeting.
I think they want to bring me on a little tour too, just to